Welcome to the Trailblazing Texas podcast, where we embark on a journey through our diverse Texas landscapes and breathtaking trails while always engaging with our amazing Texas hiking community. So settle in, tighten up those bootlaces, and get ready for the thrilling tales awaiting for you on this episode.
They'll come up and camp at 10 or 11,000 feet and they drink, and it is not good.
And on your first experience of hiking in Colorado at elevation, pay attention to what your body does at 10,000 feet, at 11,000 feet, at 12, at 13, at 14. So I've done the two high points in New Mexico and then five 14ers. And I know 11,000 feet, I really start to feel it. 13,000 feet, I really feel impacted. Like I need to stop. I need to take some breaths. And then at 14,000 feet, I feel the same as 13,000 feet. So I know that at 11 and 13 are where I really start to feel it. But, pay attention. Take a few minutes and just think about okay, what elevation am I at? And then how am I feeling? And then also the build up to that, like you said, get in early, get used to the elevation, just kind of where you're at, 10,000 feet, 5,000 feet. And then, progress from there over a few days and get out and get active.
Yeah. And it is funny you mentioned the 11,000. For me, for whatever reason, I almost always know when I'm about 12.1.
Yeah.
Because I'll be like, all right, I can feel the elevation. And it's just where you're just kind of starting to, your legs and stuff are starting to tire out faster between, breaks. I call them micro breaks. And so usually what I'll do is, I try to keep kind of maybe a slower but steady pace. And then you'll get to that point where I'll take a micro break where it's usually probably like a 30-second, 45-second, maybe a minute. Just let the heart rate kind of come back down and then just kind of get going again. Because sometimes people, their kind of natural reaction is they want to sit down and really rest. And
yeah,
the problem with that is it eats up so much time. You lose momentum, your body kind of cools down. Some of your muscles will start to kind of, tense up. And yeah, I like to kind of try to keep going and do those micro breaks where your heart rate kind of comes back down, let your body kind of catch up and continue on. And that's always worked really well for me.
Yeah. And I do the same thing, especially with new hikers and backpackers, that every switchback takes 60 seconds. First off, it's that micro break that I believe that you need. And then also it just reminds you to stop and look around. If you're on a hard hike, your head's down, you're just, and you forget to why am I here? I'm here to see the beauty. I'm here to experience this or experience that. And sometimes we get into situations where our head's down and we're just blasting through something.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Or like you said, taking the pictures, that's a lot of times when I'll do that. I'll stop, kind of look around and take a few pictures before I get going again. So.
Oh yeah. I mean, and I use taking a picture to give me that micro break. No, I'm not resting. I'm taking pictures.
Sometimes I do too. Don't tell anybody. Yeah. Nope. Yeah. Sometimes I'm the same way. Like, man, it's really pretty,
Oh, hold on. I got to take another picture.
Yeah.
So outside of smart water bottles and the best gear product that's ever created, the Trucker Joe's water bottle sleeve holder, what are some of the ways that you stay hydrated at elevation?
So again, if I know I got a fairly big day, especially in the summertime, I'll try to get a decent amount in, and then I always make it a goal to drink about 1 liter on the way to the trailhead. It seems like most everything around here, like I said, is anywhere from an hour and 10 minutes to 3 hours is what I usually try to keep it within for a day trip for driving. So I'll usually make sure that I have that 1 liter even before I even start.
That is the most important thing right there.
Yeah. is getting it before.
Camel that water.
Yep. Yeah, it's been a huge help for me because I mean, if you got it on board now, at least you're not carrying it, but it's essentially as though it just sets you up for a lot better situation, in my opinion. Because once you start sweating and all that, then you're not playing catch up the whole time. So yeah, I think that's probably the biggest thing that I do that's helped.
Yeah. And then what about, is it like so many miles that you drink, or is it more like you have a feeling that you're thirsty, so then you'll stop, like during a hike?
Yeah, I'm not great about it sometimes. Sometimes I have to like remind myself like, hey, you're sweating quite a bit. Let's take some drinks because sometimes you're trying to keep going and all that. You kind of have to tell yourself, for me, like, okay, let's stop for a second and get, maybe on one of those micro breaks that, or every other, that you're taking a little bit of shot of water, especially if you're up higher, but not as far as any sort of time. And I'm kind of bad about it in the wintertime. And that's something that people really want to be cognizant of, because it's not hot. So you're not as naturally inclined to kind of think about water,
Yeah.
And so there's some of those times where I'm like, man, it's been a while since I've had anything to drink. So I consciously think, okay, let's get some water in. But again, hydrating beforehand, I think that really helps carry me on through a lot of
That is key. That is so key. And like before I hike at the Guads, and I'm usually there in the winter, October through February, I have a liter before I start hiking.
Yeah. It's just kind of a good rule of thumb, I think. Sometimes it makes the race to the trailhead to use the bathroom pretty rough,
I'm diabetic,
mornings,
so
I'm like, man.
I have to pee a lot. So
yeah,
it definitely impacts me too.
But I think food's even kind of an important one too, but that's even one of the things that I test sometimes before on some certain days, is just what you're eating. I think really, I have friends that sometimes they'll eat something different than what they normally do, and they'll not feel
why
as
would
well.
you do that?
Yeah, just like or they don't eat at all. That's the one that really gets me. But for me, like, I've done it enough that I know that if I got a pretty big day, oatmeal is like one of the best for me. I'll do the oatmeal with some like peanut butter and a few of those things that just works well for me. But that's some of the stuff that you can kind of test as you go along. It kind of goes back into that preparation and all that.
Do not eat something that you do not know how it impacts your body.
Yeah.
On the day or night before a hike.
Yeah. Unless you're comfortable with doing some of that stuff out in the woods, which I avoid it like the plague. But there's
I've been in, not happened to me, but been with many hikers where, I started eating this sausage, and I'm like, have you ever eaten it before? No, but I don't feel good. Oh my God, why?
Like, oh man, yeah.
So,
or like you said, nothing at all. That's the other, some people do okay with it, but
that was a hard one for me because I don't ever eat breakfast. And starting hiking and not having anything to eat, especially on big days, it destroyed me. So almost like you're having to stop to take off layers if you don't be bold and start cold. Not eating. Of course, now I'm stopping because I have to eat, and
right.
So, how do you avoid getting lost on your hikes?
So,
is it always cell phone? Is it maps, paper map?
So I'm kind of bad about the map thing. As far as like having a paper copy on me, I need to be better about that. But I always have my phone. I know a lot of people like Gaia. I use, which I think it's going away, but an app called Fat Map. That's cool.
Mm-hmm.
They're in conjunction with Strava though, and I think they're getting absorbed into Strava. So I'm not sure what's going on with that, but that one's a really cool one to have. But then my InReach has the mapping. I got the Explorer Plus, so I got a map on that as well. So I do have several other things, but like I said, I should just throw a paper mapping because that's like the only thing. But most of that is preparation. So I look I kind of nerd out on maps. I just enjoy looking at them. So Google Earth or, all the different apps. There's one app that would be beneficial for people to know about if they're coming up. It's called Cotrex, Cotrex, and that is a app, I believe, by the state of Colorado that has all a lot of the trails and stuff, especially some of the more well-known stuff. But what I like about it is you don't have to download anything with it specifically. And I use it a lot of the times, like in winter, to try to stay on the actual trail, because winter routes that's its own whole little thing, but winter routes can get really weird. But it's really good about keeping you oriented and stuff. But I love to just sit there and look at maps. And so I'll look at kind of natural landmarks or kind of drainages and stuff, and have a really good understanding of what I should see and where, and just really have a good idea of that even before I even start, which is helpful too, because sometimes I'll be going along and I'm like, man, I didn't really expect the trail to be going down right here or whatever, and sometimes that'll prompt me to look at stuff and do a little course correction or whatever. It's just having that kind of overall understanding makes it just a lot more natural when you're out there.
And I think we touched on it a little bit earlier, but like you do some, and hopefully the listeners are connecting with you on Instagram and seeing some of your pictures, because they're absolutely spectacular.
I appreciate
you do
it.
some pretty sketchy stuff. And so how important is having a bailout point when you're planning and kind of going through this stuff?
I mean, really important if it's going to be a big day. Like there's this one called Mummy Mania, this route, and it's a perfect example. But it's 16, 17 miles, something like that, and a bunch of vert. But about in the middle of it, there is a saddle that you can access a trail. And just knowing that that's about midway point is really beneficial to know, because if weather does come in or all of a sudden you're not feeling well or whatever you have to go, that's, that again could be kind of a life or death situation where it's really important to know what kind of escapes that you do have.
And do you always take a satellite device?
Absolutely. Yep. Yeah. In February of 20, I believe it was, there's a unranked 13er up by Longs Peak called Mount Lady Washington that I did solo. And it was my first real experience with real bad wind. And I climbed the east face of it because I knew that the wind potential was going to be there that day. And I climbed up there and just got absolutely blasted once I was on summit, and was surprised to find myself blown down twice. So,
wow.
I was blowing off my feet. And, in February, it was super windy, but outside of that, the weather wasn't terrible, but it was still, probably single digits, maybe teens. And then with the wind chill, though, it was probably driving it well below zero. And I remember getting blown down into there and thinking, this is pretty dumb, and this could make me break the number one rule. And I'm like, there's no reason not to have something like that. I know the initial cost is a little rough. But what's your life worth to you, and since getting it though, it's I feel naked without it. So I always have that on me. I love the inReach. And then, for people that are on the fence about it, I mean, think about it. Even if you're a trailhead that you don't have cell phone service, what if you come out and you got a flat tire, or, something's wrong with your car or whatever? It's nice that you can communicate. Cause I did have that one time where a friend's car wouldn't start. Luckily we got it figured out, but man, I was able to reach out to my dad and be like, hey, I might need you to get a hold of AAA for me, and there's
you
so
can
many benefits to have it.
Yeah. inReach connects to your phone through EarthMate. You can text anybody,
Yeah. Yeah. And yeah, my family loves that I have it, obviously, and it's just so convenient, and it opens up other opportunities too, like the day with that moose. All of a sudden, we're going to be doing a totally different peak in a different area, and I was able to send out, everything's fine, but we're going to a different area, and this is where, versus not having that communication, and either basically putting yourself up to a lot of risk of people not knowing where you're starting from. I mean, we'll talk about, you've talked about that a bunch, where letting people know where you're at.
Yeah.
But if you don't have a device like that, and all of a sudden you're having to change your plans, well, now nobody even knows where you're at. So
Yeah.
there's just a lot of benefits to having them.
So let's say you have a tough day, and this I think kind of goes with the safety aspect. How do you push through when it's tough? Or let's say something's sketchy and you've already made that commitment, can't turn back.
So I kind of break it down into two categories though. Is this something that's uncomfortable, or is this something that's dangerous? If it's something that's dangerous, then I'm going to look for a way out of it as quickly as possible, whether that's backtracking. I mean, you always want to be careful. Like if you're doing a big loop, you do want to, do that research and figure out, okay, is there something that I'm going to get through and then I have to continue on? I would avoid some of that if you can.
Yeah.
But as far as like just the aspect of, a lot of it's uncomfortable. That, like I said, almost every trip I'm on, I'm like, God, this is dumb. What am I doing out here? This sucks, because it's at times it is hard. But I found
Yeah.
for me that if I can break it down into kind of smaller sections, like I did Pikes Peak in November one year. I did it the Crags route versus the Bar Trail, which is a little bit shorter. It's 14 and a half miles, and I think 46 or 4,700 vertical feet, something like that. I didn't even want to go that day. And I'm like, just get up. So then once I got up, I'm like, okay, I'm up. And I'm like, I still don't want to go. And then I just went down. I was like, just do the drive. And I ended up breaking down the whole day to where even though I didn't want to go, I was like, all right, we'll just go to this. And then once I got to that point, I'm like, oh, okay, that wasn't so bad. Or I was at least happy to be there. But if you kind of break it down into sections, it's not so, now all of a sudden I'm not thinking about it as it being a 14 and a half mile day. I'm thinking of it being like a 4 mile day,
Yeah.
And then once I get to that point, it's like, okay, that's not bad. And just, you kind of break it down into chunks. It's a little bit more digestible. Like even yesterday, you're like, okay, let's get up to these lakes. And then once you get to those, you're like, oh, you're kind of just looking to that next goalpost. But having said that, I always put a turnaround time on my days as well. I kind of prep with what I think it should take. And then I'll put a little bit of a buffer on that because, it's hard to know exactly. But I always have that turnaround time too. Like okay, I need to be to this point at this time
Yeah.
because, it's just that contingency to get out if you have to.
And do you have a good feeling, whether flat or elevation, about how fast you hike, like miles per hour?
Yeah. Yeah. For me, I'm always thinking about that stuff. Um,
Yeah.
and my rule of thumb is usually 2 miles and 1,000 feet an hour is just kind of a typical pace. Like there's some times where I'll do it faster, obviously, or sometimes it'll be a little bit slower. Like if you're on a trail and all of a sudden you got a bunch of deadfall, where you're going over trees and under trees, it's going to eat up some time. Or if it's marshy or whatever. And then on more technical terrain, I usually expect about a mile per hour. So,
Mhm.
and especially in a group, those numbers tend to be fairly good.
Yeah.
Um, and there's some days where I kind of surprise myself, like, oh, that went a little bit better than I thought. And there's other times where it's maybe a little bit longer. But yeah, I like to always be thinking about that beforehand and then reviewing it afterwards because it just makes you that much more kind of equipped for future trips.
Yeah. This next part, I just what would be your recommendations for people to get connected, non-locals, but just people that are visiting or planning a trip to Colorado? How can they get, or what is the best way to get connected to the Colorado hiking community? Like, I lucked
Well,
out because, there's certain groups and this and that, and, people aren't always nice on social media, and you can
right,
tell the person's not from Colorado, and they ask, like, "What is elevation?" And, of course, they get beat over the head
right.
head with the so what do you think the best way to, maybe to protect yourself from some of that, but just to be able to be supported by the community?
Yeah, I was going to say it is a little bit of a gamble with that, but that is also a really good resource. Is some of the pages on there, but maybe I think where people kind of fall into a trap with some of that is they do ask the exact same things that hundreds of other people have already asked. But
Yeah.
if I remember, if I remember right, like with you, like I don't usually comment a ton on there, but if I see somebody that's asking something that I can tell, they've already done some research, they're already working through some stuff, then I'm a lot more inclined to be like, oh, okay, yeah, X, Y, and Z, and I'm always happy to answer questions like that. But yeah, the Facebook, some of those resources are going to be good, and then just honestly, just Googling some of the trip reports.
Yeah.
All all trails is good and bad for what it is. I mean, anybody listening to this, I'm sure, is experienced with that. There's good and bad of that. If you're talking peaks, really, really, really good resource for Colorado is it's 14ers.com.
That is a
Um,
wonderful app and site.
yeah, it's incredible. If you're looking for information, whether it's the routes or the roads coming in or the parking situation or trip reports, it's going to be on there.
It gives you pictures
Yep.
of hiking up the thing, and it gives you pictures of the class 2 or class 3 or class
Yep.
whatever. And yeah, that's a wonderful source of
Resource. Yep.
yeah, resource.
Yeah. So again, if you're looking for peaks, that something like that's going to be awesome. And then yeah, just kind of shopping around.
Yeah. What are some of your favorite groups or resource, like, is there like a certain Facebook page that you think is offers good resources,
So they're so
Instagram
they're
group or
yeah, they're that Hiking Colorado, which I think is the one that we met on. I think that one's one of the better kind of all encompassing
Mhm.
groups. I think some of the 14er pages specifically get a little macho on
Elitist?
some of them. Yeah, there you go.
Yeah.
Elitist. That's a good way of putting it. And so I'd kind of steer out of that.
Yeah.
But like the Hiking Colorado is a pretty good one. Um, I'm kind of lucky here. One of the groups that I'm in is the Colorado Mountain Club, and that's been a really good resource for me too. Is some of the people involved in that. That's a really really cool group and one that I'm a member of. So I utilize some of the resources from that as much as I can too.
Okay. And so yeah, I would definitely say to the listeners, when you're joining these groups and you have a question, you can certainly search within the group if that question has been asked before, and I would probably do that first. I think also, like, for me, just to show that that you've tried to earn the knowledge on your own, and um
Yeah, and that's the thing because you see so many of them that's like, oh, what's a great hike within an hour and a half of Denver, and I mean that's
that's a
something to
Google
get.
search.
Yeah. I mean, it's all over the place. But if somebody's asking something a little more specific or something like, again, like in your case, I could tell that it already went down a lot of avenues to try to figure some stuff out,
Yeah.
and then beyond that, there's some people that are excited to help others, and
Yeah.
they're out there. So
And you knew that in 4 years from then I was going to have a podcast, so
yeah, you just never know how it goes. Well, and and I enjoy connecting with people and helping and recommending stuff. I do enjoy that, but it's just, yeah, you never know where it'll take you. Cause like you said, I would have never thought so.
Since you've been hiking for a little bit, how has hiking changed in Colorado based on, I don't know, popularity or infrastructure? Um, I would assume that hiking and backpacking has always been popular, in the state. And
Yeah, it has. It's like skiing, obviously skiing's huge here as well. And so hiking and just the outdoors in general has always been big, but I'm sure pretty much anybody that's listening to this in any state can relate to the pre and post COVID growing
yeah,
pains. It's really, really, really blown up after COVID. For example, like Rocky Mountain National Park was never a timed entry before COVID. Same with Brainerd, same with Mount Blue Sky, all of these places, even the incline down in Colorado Springs. I don't know how familiar you are with that. That's always something that a lot of people. It's have you heard of
is
that?
that those steps like 2000
Yeah,
and something step? Yeah,
yeah. You end up doing almost 2,000 vertical feet in point 0.9 or 9/10 of a mile.
yeah. Oh,
But even that's timed entry. Just all of these things have gone to that, and more of it's changing to that. But if you go early enough, you can avoid some of that. There's some areas like Brainerd recreation, you can't. They police it really hard, but yeah, it definitely spiked. Like I said, early COVID, and it's tapered off a tiny bit, but there's certain areas that you just know it's going to be busy. The park, being one of them. So
yeah. So, how do you adapt your hiking plans for the different seasons in Colorado? Like for in Texas, I don't hike in the summer, but
right,
the spring, the fall, the winter, like I don't really have to adapt really anything. I can go to Guadalupe Mountains. Yeah, it may sleet, it may snow a little bit. It's going to be 19 degrees. I'm still going to go hike. Like it's nothing that is that someone can't handle. But like in Colorado, and we talked about this, or I've talked about this many times on the podcast, that every time you step on the trail, you should always think about what are the worst things that can happen to you, because they could probably
right.
happen to you. But in Colorado, I mean, people die.
Mm.
Like in Texas, you've heard of a here or there, but it's really a rarity. But man, in Colorado, there's no joke. Especially you
Yeah,
start getting caught in those storms, snowstorm or this. How does the weather and the seasons impact you?
I mean, yeah, it's huge. For me personally, there's times where I won't even know if I'm going to go or not until the day before,
Yeah.
because I mean, you can look at weather 3 days out and it can be pretty different the day of, and so weather is going to be obviously the main factor. A few of the people that have been fatalities on longs, actually, I would say the majority of them has been weather type stuff, and some of them, they're going up and they're attempting some of this stuff when there's like a weather or a winter advisory that afternoon, and it's like you're not giving yourself any sort of a chance when you do that. So for me personally, again, going back to how conservative I am, is sometimes I'll look at the day that I'm planning on going, but then I'll look at the next day too. Because if all of a sudden you get up there and you have to stay the night, okay, that's one thing. But what about the next day? What's that weather look like the next day? Is it going to be, a blowing snowstorm that day? And I kind of just pick a place or a route based on those factors, to where I don't have to be as concerned about that. But then it goes back again to the layers, making sure I have the right clothing, base layers, boots, the gaiters, I think, are huge, because all of a sudden you step down in some deep snow and fill your boots with snow. That's not fun. So Yeah,
So
the
the
equipment
seasons
and
really
gear.
impact you. Yeah, I mean
Oh,
with
huge.
gear, what you're packing.
Yeah, yeah. It all comes down to it.
Yeah, and so when you have a hike and let's say it's winter, do you have multiple options for that day? So like if the weather's bad, then I'm going to go to option B. If that's blah blah blah, go to option C. Or usually the weather impacts all like the whole area, and you're pretty much out of luck.
No, you can if you're willing to drive. Like my buddy Ryan and his wife Kira, there's some of the most accomplished mountain friends I have by far. But there's times when they'll have an option kind of on the northern part of the state, more towards the center, and then or they'll drive 2 or 3 hours south to get out of
No,
it. So you definitely can look at different places because I've done that too, where I'll look at something in the park or I'll look at something down, like off the I-70 corridor. And if it's all kind of crappy, then I'll look at something that's a little bit shorter or maybe it's going into a lake or something. So,
yep. So what are some tips that you would have for winter hiking?
um,
If you're from
and
Texas, don't do it.
it's not the best time to go. It's not
Yeah.
the best time to go.
I mean,
But
you have to be experienced, and you need an ice axe and crampons probably. Like it's
depending on
not.
where you're going, I mean,
Yeah,
really, if you're getting more into like the mountaineering stuff, then yeah, ice axe, crampons, all of that. I don't do a ton of that, just because like with the yeah, just there's so much that goes into it. Um, but even just having a good set of micro spikes and all your layers and all that, you can get to some really cool places. The majority of the wintertime. Um, Rent snowshoes, even if you don't think you'll need them. A lot of times it's good to have snowshoes. I hate
hmm.
snowshoeing, but they're kind of a necessary evil. Um, it's pretty rare that I think, oh, I don't know if that was worth it. But a couple of times, like one day, a lot of times I'll go up Christmas Day to Rocky Mountain National Park. And one year I was up there breaking trail just to, it's only a couple miles, but man, when you're breaking trail with snowshoes, it can be pretty exhausting. But if you didn't have them, you'd be in real trouble. So
And so, what would dictate you to use snowshoes versus just
if
like
I
post holing? Like,
yeah, if I'm post holing, um, or usually if it's much above probably my knee, if I'm starting to get more up to like the depth of like my thighs, I'll put on snowshoes because
yeah,
otherwise it's just so exhausting. But yeah, that's kind of my threshold of it. And then when it gets later in the year and it's not as soft, there'll be times where you're cruising along and all of a sudden you hit a soft spot and you post hole, and that drives me crazy. So sometimes I'll put them on it in that case too, because nothing surprises you like a nice soft spot where you're going along. So
oh yeah. So, in getting ready for your hikes, how do you research and prepare for a certain hike?
so
I know we talked kind of about like Facebook groups and stuff, but what do you do? What is your kind of like your process to get enough knowledge at maybe like a new area that you haven't explored?
so depending on kind of how common or how whatever the area or peak is, a lot of times I'll start off with something like all trails just to see if there's anything out there. And the only
Right.
reason I like all trails is because it's going to give you probably the most recent conditions. Um, but outside of that, I don't really use all trails for much. Um,
Yeah.
but then I'll start using some of the map apps, like I said, like a Cotrex or Fat Map or whatever, and then I'll use sometimes just Google Earth because I want to kind of see in 3D kind of like what the peak might look like or what that area looks like.
Yeah.
If it's
And so you're looking for class 3, class 4 type scenarios?
sometimes, I mean, on when it comes to the more technical stuff like that, I'm more relying on something that's like 14ers.com or
Yeah.
or something like that, where there's been a trip report from people that have done it and are really skilled. And that's the thing. Something like third and fourth class type terrain, you're not going to find very good information like that on all trails or anything like that, because that's kind of more just the kind of typical trail class 1, class 2 type routes on that. It's not to say that they're not on there, but no, I kind of start really diving more into actual trip reports or blogs from people that have done stuff before, start looking at pictures and different stuff.
And how far out before your planned hike that you start this stuff in, like, trip reports and stuff?
Usually the week of. I kind of have like a rolling list of places that I want to go or see. And so I'll kind of have an idea on what it is, but usually when I make the decision to go to that particular place, I'll dive in a lot more heavily about that week of, because otherwise, if it's much before that, stuff can kind of easily get mixed in with others. I have a buddy, his YouTube is kind of fun. His name's Nick Sengetta. I met him actually through YouTube because of all the hikes that he does. And he does a really nice job of videoing them, all the stuff. And you can see, all the different junctions, and he shows the trailhead, and he's been a really good resource. So YouTube is another good source for some of my route research that I'll do.
So I did a lot of research, and the gentleman's name is Virtual Sherpa. I don't know what his name is, but
Virtual Sherpa.
Yeah.
Yep.
He's an animal in Colorado, it seems.
Yeah, and so he does a lot of the more technical stuff too. So he's a good one to have. A lot of the 14ers, some of the different routes. So that's good, because now you're getting a really good visual on kind of what some of that terrain might look like.
So as we kind of start to wrap up, I hope that you have some amazing stories for me, whether it's danger or funny stories, or just kind of like what is it like to the life as a Colorado hiker or backpacker on the trail? You got any good stuff?
So again, some of the wind is crazy. We were crossing a lake, so that's one of the things that you want to be really careful of. Is in the wintertime, it's great on some of those because the lakes freeze over, and it makes navigating and travel a whole lot easier when you can go across this lake. And so it was in January, so it was perfectly safe on that aspect. But it was funny. I was wearing my micro spikes, and my partner and I were kind of laughing because I'm kind of shuffling my feet because the wind is blowing so dang hard that it's like pushing me, and I'm kind of almost like skiing. Well, all of a sudden, man, this gust hit me, and the next thing you know, I'm laying on my side, and I'm just being like pushed across the ice. And
what?
there was a couple other people, and it was just laughing because I'm sure it just looked ridiculous because there's people that are kind of in the trees on the side, and you can kind of see the snow being blown too across the lake. And
it's blowing that hard.
Oh yeah, it's sometimes it gets ridiculous. And so I'm just kind of laughing because here I am, I was on my feet, now I'm on my side, getting kind of pushed along a little bit. And I mean, it obviously wasn't like a long ways, but it was enough to be like, this is very unnatural. And but there's a couple people that were ice skating, a little bit further down this lake, and I could see the wind that hit me. I could see it pushing some snow, and as soon as it hit them, now both of them are on the ground, and it just kind of went through and just wiped us all out. But no, it's just the wind can be crazy, and it's one of the things that probably drives me nuts the most is the wind, and it can one of the more dangerous factors, obviously, besides the obvious of like lightning or something like that. But you get up on a narrow ridge or something, that wind can be really, really dangerous. So as benign and funny as it was on that lake, it's pretty scary when you're up on a ridge or a peak.
Yeah. And it's funny, like how just a bit of wind changes your perspective of exposure.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
Like,
yeah. It's, yeah, all of a sudden you have something that's so unpredictable, that's kind of pushing on you, and yeah, it can change your attitude with it pretty quick. But probably one of the more out of the comforts times that I've had, was again with my buddy Ryan and his wife. We did a ridge, and it was well within their experience level, but it was definitely at the top of mine. And I remember getting to this one area, and we're just traversing, and I think it was like a mile, and it was like 1.2, I think, to go across this thing. And yeah, I remember one of the times Ryan was looking, he's like, man, he's like, I don't know, this is pretty spicy. We get to the
Oh,
spot,
he said that?
yeah, he said it, and I'm like, oh my god, if he's saying it, then what the hell am I going to do? And luckily we were able to kind of poke around and find a way out. But it's interesting, the mental fatigue that sometimes you'll get to of being in an environment that's so close to kind of the top of your comfort zone. And we end up making it across no problem, but there's those times when you're like, man, you're telling yourself, like, what happens if I get to a spot where this is going to exceed my comfort or skill level? Because so much of it revolves around risk tolerance versus experience versus physical ability. And if you don't have all those things kind of in alignment, it can turn something that's a lot of fun and enjoyable into something that is really not much fun. And I remember thinking on this, and they're great, they're good about coaching people through or whatever. But I just remember getting like most of the way across there being like, what the hell happens if I get clear to the end of this thing and all of a sudden there's not something that I can do? And it's like, at that point, I either have to make the decision where I'm going to push my way through this, or do I go back the way I came the mile, and
Oh man.
but again, it's in that experience and stuff that you really grow. But there's some of those times, you're really wondering what's going on. So,
And it's funny you say like mental exhaustion. That happened to me in Rainier. It was in July, I believe, and they just opened the road up to Paradise. So we decided to go do Paradise and then go up to the Muir snowfields, so right below Camp Muir, and then come back down. And I was doing great, micro spikes, ice axe, felt awesome. And then we get to this part, and it's probably on a non-snow when it's all melted, just, I don't know, maybe 800 feet of gain, but like nothing big. But the snow, it was big to me. And this is my first time on snow. And so, John starts to teach me, about French step and how to use the ice axe. And then some of the steps I was having to dig my steps.
yep. Kick in and all
So
that.
yeah, so I was, and then I'm worrying about, okay, when I step, is the snow going to always be there? Could it slip out from under me? And just mentally going through all these scenarios that mentally I just said, yeah, we got about halfway up and I'm like, yeah, I got to turn back down because I'm mentally exhausted. I can't, And then he starts talking about avalanche, and we got to get through this section quick because you see those cracks in the snow. And I'm like,
yep.
Oh, crap.
Yeah, and kind of going back to like what you were saying earlier about preparation stuff, I forgot to mention that is, avalanche stuff. Some of these apps,
that's a whole nother thing, right?
It's a whole nother deal. Yeah. Because now you're looking at the aspect, you're looking at, how steep all the stuff is. And so now you're having to add in avalanche terrain avoidance, looking at what slopes. There was a couple killed on a route the following week after a friend of mine and I had went through. It was good when we went through, but it got like another foot or two of snow between that time and ended up burying them that very next weekend. And so there's all that stuff that kind of reminds you of how how real it can be. And then again, probably this kind of ties into one of the more dangerous aspects and kind of the mental side of it is we went and did Mount Sneffels, and there's a Southwest Ridge that's really, really popular, and it's beautiful. We weren't able to do that one because of the weather window we had, so we just did the standard route. But when we got to the trailhead, there was the mountain rescue. One of their rigs was up there, and he's like, "Hey, just to let you know, there's going to be an air operation. They're hoisting a guy off here this morning. So when the helicopter approaches, if you would just kind of sit down wherever you're at." So we're like, okay. So sure enough, we take off and we're going up, and all of a sudden you can start hearing the helicopter come in. And so we'd kind of sit down, and they did 2 or 3 passes, and then they started like dropping off equipment. And we kind of just kept, when they would fly away, we kept just kind of making our way up these gullies. And we got up to the ridge line that connected to where they did this operation. And we sat there and watched them fly in and hoist this guy out. And then I didn't really realize it at the time, but even just watching, this guy getting hoisted off, it kind of puts this weird mental thing in you. And I thought it was just me.
Ask that. Yeah.
Yeah. I thought it was kind of just me at the time. But talking to my partners that day, they were kind of in the same deal. And it was just kind of a weird way to start that trip is watching, them hoist this person out of where he fell right where we're going to be hiking up through. And then that was a weird day because the day before, again, the weather was pretty rough, and it had hailed and sleet and all sorts of crap the day before. And so there was some of that accumulated on there. And for whatever reason, Mountain Rescue ended up directing us up a more narrow gully. And that's kind of what I mentioned earlier, these people that were sending stuff down. And one of the worst was, this rock about the size of a microwave, that they had sent down. And rockfall is one of those things that I don't think a lot of people maybe that aren't familiar with being up in some of the more technical terrain is used to. But yeah, falling is obviously a huge risk factor, but man, you have a rock the size of a, milk jug or something come down at you, man, it's not good. And the sound, I'm sure, I think I've heard you talk about just the sound that those large rocks make as they're tumbling down some of those. It's kind of eerie.
Yeah. And I never understood the importance of kind of watching that. But when Sam and I, we did El Capitan, and I sent you those pictures where I was like,
Yeah.
what class do you think this is? Well, going down, he's right below me by about 10 or 15 feet. And I kicked off a rock accidentally. Like I stumbled back and the rock went forward. And so I started yelling rock, he stepped to the side. But then you're thinking like, man, we shouldn't be walking like, right. We should be angled from each other.
Yeah.
And then I started like, it really hit me like, man, this is no joke. A little rock could kill you. We didn't have helmets either.
Yeah. Yeah. And I tend to usually wear a helmet once you start getting third class and above. There's some routes that are third class that's probably not totally necessary, but
better to be safe than sorry.
Yeah. And it's interesting too, is sometimes, you want to be kind of further away from your partner, so they have time to get out of the way of a rock. But then sometimes you want to be very close, because then if you do knock something loose, it doesn't have a chance to gain that momentum. For example, like if it's smaller rock, then you'd probably want to be a lot closer. But if it's big rocks, then you probably want to have some sort of space. But that I always talk about that as kind of staying out of that shadow from one person to the next. So sometimes I'll do that where you kind of get over and you just stay put. So until they kind of clear out of the way, whether they're above or below you.
In your hiking these days, how much of it are you harnessed and roped in to other people, or is it not yet? Not really.
Not much.
Yeah.
No, most of the third and fourth class, you don't do a whole lot of that. Last year with the CMC, I did this alpine scrambling course, which is kind of cool because it opens us up bigger trips and stuff that you can do. And as abundance of caution, they had some of the routes that there would be sections where they'd put in a fixed line. So it was kind of nice though, because if you weren't real comfortable with the exposure or some of the technical stuff, you were clipped into this fixed line, and it made it really, really nice. But I haven't done a whole lot of roped in climbing when it comes to a lot of stuff down around here.
Yeah.
So,
All right. Well, so I got the last two questions, and I always finish the episodes with these questions. And let's say it could be local, it could be a visitor from Texas. What is one piece of gear that you would recommend for any new hiker or backpacker? So I'll go first. My
I know
one
what yours
piece of
is.
gear, yeah, it's the Trekker Joe water bottle sleeve holder, and I got like 6 of them back here behind my head.
Yeah. Well, that's the one I was going to use. No, just kidding.
Yeah.
No, so probably like we were talking about earlier was the shell. I think that's awesome to have that. It's just going to carry you through again. It's going to make it a whole lot of more, but yeah, probably that as far as. And then one of the things that's kind of specific to me, and this sounds kind of silly, is I always wear and have bandanas with me, and it's not because I think they look cool. It's the opposite. However, keeping the sweat out of your eyes has been clutch for me. But then in wintertime, when you're sweating, it's so nice that absorbs the sweat and it doesn't get into like your stocking cap or whatever that you have over that. And I always bring several of them. That way I can change them out, and it helps keep the sun off and all that. And then probably the other thing, I know you only said one, but I'm getting crazy here. Sunglasses.
No, get crazy.
Yeah. Sunglasses are huge too, especially if there's snow. So I can't, that is one thing. So I remember one time I forgot the bandanas, and I remember being significantly more uncomfortable, but sunglasses, I would probably, especially if there's snow, I couldn't be able to do it. That would be something that I would have to go
It's
home.
dangerous, right? You can get snow blindness.
Yeah, you get snow blind, and it's sunglasses is huge. And then obviously the obvious stuff that goes with all that. But
all right, last question. So what is one piece of safety advice? And I know we've talked about a lot, but like, what is your main piece of safety advice that you would give to a new hiker backpacker?
Well, as far as advice, just in general, would be the prep and the research. Like 90% of the issues that you hear about is people getting themselves into something that they weren't equipped for. Again, whether that be weather, whether that be, how technical it is, all of that stuff. And then the other side of it, as far as like equipment, would be the bivy, like I mentioned before. That's something that's maybe a little bit more specific, but would be applicable to you too if you're talking teens. Do you carry something like that in your packs?
I don't. And I was going to tell you the shell. I did not learn the importance of a shell up until this past February.
Yeah.
And my climbing partner and hiking partner Henning, he's a shell guru, and he's got the layering system down to even unzipping his zipper to let the heat out. Yeah. And so he's got it to an art form. And I always like, oh, shells smell, whatever, I don't care. And he goes, just take it. So I took it, and it's windy. I think at that time we started, it was 23 degrees, and man, that is the greatest outside of the Trekker Joe water bottle sleeve holder. Having a shell and knowing how to use it is a game changer.
Yeah, absolutely. Yep. Yeah, but then if stuff goes wrong, that bivy can literally be.
So do you have any like? Would you recommend any that the listeners could look up, or off the top of your head, company?
I believe the one I have is just Sol, SOL, I believe
Mm-hmm.
is the, which is kind of funny now to think about SOL. I believe that's the
Yeah.
brand though.
Is it
But
pretty
just
light?
REI. Oh yeah, it's
Yeah.
super light. Yeah, it's super light, and it's about half the size of a Coke can, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's one of those things that if you take it out and use it, you probably never get it back in its package.
Yeah.
Um, but it just lives in
Like
my
a
pack.
tent or a sleeping bag.
Yeah, exactly. Which real quick, I know we're kind of getting off the paint, but I
No.
my one of my buddies, he's quite the character, and this last weekend we were going up hiking and for Huron, and we camped the night before, and when he came over to my house, he's putting all his stuff in my truck, and he I got a rooftop tent on my Tacoma, and he comes over with his tent, and he's carrying it like this. I said, "What the hell is that?" He's like, "It's my tent." I'm like, "It's your tent?" He's like, "Yeah." And he's like, "Once you take them out of the bags, you can never get them back in." And I was like, "Oh man, all right, whatever."
This is
So
gonna be a long day.
so he stuffs that in the back of my truck, and we make the drive down, and we find a spot, and we're starting to build camp. I'm opening up my tent and everything, and he grabs his, and all of a sudden I hear him say, "What? Where the hell's my poles?" And
Oh no.
he's rifling through that. He's like, "Where's my poles? Have you seen my poles?" I said, "No." I said,
Are
all
you
I saw."
shitting me?
So he had no poles for his tent. And but he's such a good dude, and he's such a character, and he's like, "Oh,
Yeah.
it'll be all right," or whatever,
He's like, "Can I borrow your bivy?"
yeah. And then I ended up, yeah, I was giving him all sorts of hell about it, uh, but it was funny. One of my best friends who actually lives in Austin, uh, she's always saying that I don't give a meow. So that's what he said. He's like, "I don't have any pulse, but you know what? I don't give a meow." And so we ended up just tying a piece of rope up to one tree, down
Yeah.
through like the top hook of where the poles would be, up to
Oh
the other
my
one. And so
gosh.
it was a sad tent, but it was a tent nonetheless.
Hey, you just needed it for one night, right?
Just needed it for one night.
Oh
So,
my
but
gosh.
it was just funny. But yeah, when you said that, it reminded me, because that's what he said. He's like, once you take him out, you can never get him back in there. So I was like, all right.
So for me, and I out so there I have two pieces of safety advice that, man, I'll to the day I die, I will preach, preach, preach. Get rid of your water bladders, but we won't go into that because we're ending the podcast.
Right.
Um, always, always, always tell somebody your itinerary.
Right.
You don't need to have an in reach. You don't need to have all this fancy stuff. Just tell somebody, I'm going to go hike here. I'm going to start hiking at X amount of time. It's going to take me probably this long, and I should be done by this time. And
Yeah.
if you get there and you're ending up changing your itinerary, let that person know. And if they don't respond back to you saying,
Don't do
"I
it.
got it," just go home.
Yeah.
Do not change your itinerary that you've let someone know.
Yeah. That's a bare minimum too, is that,
Yeah.
that's one of the things that I started doing initially. And with the inReach, one of the preset messages I have is starting my trip, that I send out every single time that I go.
Yep.
And
That's one of mine too.
then that way there's just no sort of question. And then I always send another preset message when I reach my destination, because now they know where you're at. And if God forbid something happens, you've really limited it down. And one of the things I meant to mention earlier too, is as part of this safety thing that I'm going to start working more towards, is like a shell, get the most brightest obnoxious color you can. Mine's black, everything I have. And it's always been like, oh, I don't want light colors because it gets dirty. I just heard there was a rescue here 2 weeks ago where the helicopter really had a hard time seeing this person, even though they were right above them, because of the color of their clothing.
Yeah.
And so the bright colored clothing is really, really important in just having that out there too.
And also sometimes that's the clothing that goes on sale because no one wants to buy it.
Right. Yeah. But
You
if you can
know,
find something that's orange or
yeah. If
yellow
you
or
look
something
in the
like that.
clearance racks for whatever you're looking for, usually the clearance racks has the most obnoxious colors and what you would probably want in those types of
Yep.
scenarios.
Yeah.
Oh,
And that's just kind of something that's been kind of more obvious lately. And I'm like, oh yeah, that makes total sense of having just a bright colors. So
yeah.
easier to spot.
And I asked so I recorded a podcast a couple days ago that'll come out in I think in September. But do you think that all this technology that we have now enables us to, or does it enable us to get into situations that we're not yet ready for?
I I think there is an element of that.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's and it's funny. I just that Nick Sangetta that I was mentioning, he had a video that I just saw and I'm kind of cracking up about. I guess I don't remember who's making it, but there's a company that's trying to make pants that would basically it's almost like robo pants where they help you for like climbing.
Yeah.
It's something that would help propel you up the trail. And I'm like, it's like, what the heck is this? Yeah, it was like Mogo or something like that. Is like something they're supposed to be coming out, starting to roll. They're $5,000, but they're supposed to be like these pants there's some new technology where it's supposed to help power. It's got like this. It almost looks like a knee brace, and it's like, what the heck is this? But that's one of the things he's talking about. He's like, this is only probably going to enable people that really shouldn't be going into these places
Yes.
anyway. And yeah, I mean, there's probably some benefits to it. Somebody that maybe has some mobility issues or something, but yeah, technology can get definitely kind of sideways with some of that
I
stuff
was
for
thinking
sure.
about that, and like also these influencers are showing all these pictures of this and that, and like to get to that picture spot, there's might be a lot that's going to take for you to get there,
Right.
and in putting yourself in situations that you're just not ready for. Yeah, it was an interesting question and discussion that we had, but yeah, I just thought I'd get your take on that.
Yeah, and I think a lot of it is good stuff so far. Again, like the inReach and all that. I like I mentioned earlier, a lot of the name of the game is mitigating risk, and some of the equipment and stuff they have out now, whether it be a shell or an inReach, it's so much better than what it used to be, and that stuff's very, very beneficial. But yeah, I mean,
No,
when you start getting into some of the crazy technology and stuff, then yeah, I can see it being kind of bad stuff.
no. Well, Jamie, we have come to an end. I want to
Sounds
thank
good.
you so much for taking 3 hours out
Oh,
of
yeah,
your Monday. I definitely think our Texas hiking community will get a lot out of what it means to hike in Colorado, and
awesome.
and hopefully, they will not be a pain in the locals' butts.
Nah, I'm not worried about it at all.
No, no,
No.
you're accepting of us.
Oh yeah, yeah. Just like I said, it's the people that come and just enjoy it and respect it. And I don't care where you're from. It's definitely not my position to gatekeep. I know it's a pretty special place and enjoy sharing it with the people that appreciate it.
Oh
So
yeah, you absolutely heaven on earth is Colorado.
yeah,
All right, man. Thanks again, and
absolutely. Thanks for
definitely,
having me.
yeah, I would definitely love later on for you to come back on the podcast, share any stories or experiences or anything. But we'll definitely be in touch.
Absolutely. No, I really enjoyed the time, and yeah, anytime I get a chance to talk about the mountains, I'm all for it. So I appreciate it.
Yeah, and so two things. I'd still need to confirm the dates in February if you could ever make it down to
Yeah,
Guad.
I'd love
And
that.
go ahead and give the listeners one more time your Instagram.
Yeah, it's just JHOUSE SRT8, and
Yep.
yeah, there's just me on a mountain on there probably. So
Yeah. And
that's all I post
again,
though. So
yeah, snow, and that's wonderful. And it's just like with John, one of my good friends in Washington, like his photography and the stuff that he does is, for me is absolutely spectacular. So I would definitely want to share that with the listeners and just to see what's possible in Colorado.
yeah, no, I appreciate it. It kind of just started off as a way to remember some of the trips, and yeah, I really enjoy the photography side of it too. So it's a lot of fun.
Yeah. Oh, real quickly,
Yep.
how was the Trailblazing Texas podcast sticker on your mug? How has that been for you? Is that a game changer?
I love it. Yeah, really.
Yeah.
It makes me to
Does
where
that change?
I have to show it every time. No.
Yeah. Does that change the way you hike and backpack?
Absolutely. Yeah, I feel lighter and more refreshed each time I take a drink.
Yes, I knew that was going to happen. All right, man. Have a wonderful rest of your night.
You too, my friend. Appreciate it.
All right. Bye. And that wraps up another exciting episode of the Trailblazing Texas podcast. We hope you enjoyed the episode today and stay tuned for our next episode where we will pick back up where we left off and guarantee to uncover many more hiking gems and share many more tips to enhance your experience on the trail. Until then, happy trails and happy hiking.